Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome you all to my new top 5 segment. This time we'll be talking about the top 5 underrated AP mid laners. This one tends to be one of the more popular top 5 lists that I do because a lot of people enjoy playing things that are somewhat off meta or something that people don't usually play. So before I get into it, first off I want to say that Vel'Koz I did not put on this list because I feel like I've been putting him in the #1 spot for the past several top 5 underrated lists, and I want to make room for other champions. So that's going to be a quick disclaimer. If I were to put him on this list, he would still probably be #1, but again, I want to make room for other champions. And also for you guys to remember that this list is definitely my opinion combined with just simple statistics that I have found in terms of what champions that are not really played very often are also very successful when they are played. But without any further ado, let's go to the #5 spot. So starting everything off is going to be Elise, the champion I just finished talking about in a very recent video, which actually if you haven't watched yet, I really recommend checking it out. Again, the main reason this champion is here is because she is simply strong in the current meta, especially when you take into consideration the recent buffs that she has received. And I know a lot of people really dislike facing champions like Yasuo, Zed, Talon in the mid lane because they're assassins and they're very annoying to deal with. Well, Elise is quite a good answer for it. She has quite a strong laning phase as long as she can be at least somewhat in range of her opponent, but if someone like, for example, a Xerath or Vel'Koz that sits all the way back in the laning phase is up against an Elise, well, the Elise is not going to have a good time. But you saw right there, she has a huge amount of trading potential, doing a lot of damage with both of her Qs, her W in human form and her W and Q in spider form also being extremely strong, on top of those little spiders that she summons which now deal magic damage, doing quite an absurd amount of damage. Another cool thing is that her W in human form is so hard to get away from because it will simply chase their target to no end. But speaking of chasing, not only does her E ability in spider form let her chase her targets quite well on top of also escaping, but it lets you dodge many abilities within the game, which is a huge plus in my books. She also has good sustain in the laning phase thanks to the HP she gets per auto attack in spider form. Overall, Elise is just a very meta type champion that just happens to be very solid right now in the jungle and also translates well into mid lane. However, the cons of this spider is that her auto attack animation in human form is absolutely atrocious, and CSing with that is going to be a little bit difficult until you're used to it. Her wave clear is actually quite bad because the W, even though it does do good AoE damage, is probably not going to hit more than at least 2 or 3 minions, unless you get very lucky positioning on the minions or your W. And like I said, she's a very situational pick for mid lane. I mean, yeah, she has a lot of really good matchups like I mentioned, but she also has some really bad ones, and especially against champions that are actually quite common to see in the mid lane. Overall, an interesting and well-deserved #5 spot. And moving into the #4 spot is going to be a champion I don't often talk about because I really don't think he's anything too special prior to this patch. However, with the reworked AP items, now is definitely his time to slowly begin to shine. First off, I mean, his kit is actually quite strong. He has insane damage output and he can do a whole lot in teamfights. But the main reason I want to start highlighting Brand is the fact that Liandry's and Rylai's both got that rework, which now work very well on him. The Liandry's plus Brand's passive lets you shred through a target, especially with Ignite, extremely easily, like you see on the Graves right there. But if you later throw in a Rylai's on top of everything else, since he is somewhat of a mid-range caster, so he might be in the middle of the fight every now and then, but then Rylai's gives him the HP to survive that. But the main thing is the slow on his E ability, which almost ensures the fact that you will simply land your Q. Then you have his passive that will also constantly slow your target, and really just every single ability that he has, including, like I said, his passive, will apply to the Rylai's effect. So that right there is the main reason I want to start highlighting Brand, but he also has a pretty solid laning phase if you max W first, pretty good harass and wave clear. He can definitely burst most of the meta champions since the meta has shifted to slightly squishier champions, not as tanky as before. But if you still come across a tank, so for instance maybe like a Garen you see in this game, his passive and Liandry's are designed to simply shred through them. Overall, a very aggressive kit that can do a lot in teamfights but can also be quite useless if you misplay it. The cons of Brand, and the first one being one of the main reasons why I don't really like Brand super much, is the fact that he needs 2 abilities to stun his target, of course using his W, his ult, or his E ability to first set ablaze his target and then following it up with the Q to actually land the stun. His ratios on his abilities aren't necessarily super high, but then again he does have every single ability that is offensive and does deal somewhat decent base damage. And last but not least, his ultimate is still somewhat random. I mean, yeah, you can still technically force it to attack who you want it to attack, but at the end of the day it is still attacking the champions at random unless it's just 2 champions. So sometimes you're simply going to be praying that it attacks the target that you want it to. But overall, I think Brand is finally getting the spotlight he deserves thanks to the AP item rework. Following Brand is going to be Malzahar, sitting in the number 3 spot for very similar reasons as to why I think Brand is also very good. Because Liandry's and Rylai's also work quite well on Malzahar with his E ability. Again, the concept is still very similar to why it's so good on Brand. It can simply put so much damage on a target, constantly slow them, and I mean the synergy is just there. But other than that, I think Malzahar has among the best laning phases of many AP mid laners because not many can match his early game pushing abilities. Because by around level 5, you can simply put your E in a target, spawn your Voidling, and it's gonna simply destroy the whole wave in just a few seconds, and you're probably not gonna run out of mana anytime soon. And another cool thing is that he's one of the few champions that still has a silence ability in his kit, since a lot of other champions did have it removed, for instance Kassadin, Talon, LeBlanc. His AoE damage is nothing to laugh at with his Q and his W abilities, but where he really shines is being able to do an insane amount of damage to one target, of course applying your E, your Q, your W, and then following up with your ultimate, forcing them to stay within your W, while having your little Voidling bitch slap your target several times. And speaking of which, he's really good at shutting down a fed target, so maybe the enemy Kha'Zix in the jungle is super strong, well you can always just use your ultimate on him in a team fight and chances are you simply countered him. Overall, a solid laning phase and scales quite well while also being able to shut down any fed targets, which happens to be quite often in solo queue. However, the cons of this champion is the fact that he has no escape, much like pretty much every champion I'll be talking about in this list. His ultimate unfortunately also makes him stand still as well, which can definitely make him vulnerable. And Malzahar does feel somewhat of a supporty type champion to me, helping his team get the kills on targets with his ultimate and all of that, rather than being just a sole carry of himself. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a little problematic when you're really trying to carry a game. Moving forward and going to the number 2 spot is going to be our favorite donger in the game, Heimerdinger. This guy is quite the definition of an underrated AP mid laner. I mean, his play rate is very low, but his win rate is actually quite high. And the main reason for that is because he's simply hard to play against, like you're going to see in this team fight right here. Not only do people simply underestimate the amount of damage your turrets can do, and really just your whole kit altogether, but no one really plays against Heimer super often, so they don't really know what to expect either. So whenever a huge fight just erupts, you throw down all your turrets and your empowered version of your turret from your ultimate, and boom, the whole team fight is going to be won by you just simply standing there and AFKing. But similar to that, he's also quite strong when it comes to the early 1v2 ganks whenever the jungler tries to come and kill you. You simply throw down your turrets, throw down your ultimate turret, and you're just gonna kill all of them without much problem. So that's definitely the main reason why he's just so good and underrated, because not only does his kit do a lot of damage and it's really respectable in my opinion, but a lot of people aren't going to be respecting it and they're not going to be expecting it either. His ultimate also gives him options whether he wants to cast his ultimate Q, W, or E, and you guys know I'm a huge fan of kits that provide different options and variants, because it usually means that this champion can achieve various things in various scenarios, so that's really good to have. His missiles have a long range and do a lot of damage if they all hit the same target. His E ability also has pretty good range and a decent stun capabilities, though it's a little hard to land. He can easily push in most mid laners, similar to how a Malzahar can as well, by simply throwing down your E ability for Malzahar and pushing in the wave, or in this case Heimer, throwing down your turrets across the lane, making it really hard to stop you and gank you while also pushing in the lane. Overall, this is really the definition of an underrated champion. I highly recommend picking him up if you haven't and trying him out. I promise you, you're gonna have a lot of fun playing and feel a lot stronger than you ever thought you possibly could as the donger. However, the cons of the donger is that your towers do eventually become free gold for your enemy mid laner or just the teammates in general on the enemy team, especially if they can outrange your towers. He also can take a little bit of time to set up for a team fight if he doesn't have his 3 turrets from his Q ability placed and ready to go, so that can be a little issue if a fight erupts out of nowhere. And his turrets also can make last hitting in the laning phase a little bit awkward if you're not used to it. But other than that, this is really a good champion and I really recommend picking up if you haven't. And finally, the number 1 spot I'm going to be giving to in my top 5 underrated AP mid laners list is going to be going to Veigar. Ever since his small rework a few patches ago, I've not liked Veigar whatsoever, and I really thought he was actually quite bad until recently I started picking him up again. Not only am I really starting to enjoy his new kit and how it works together, except for the of course really bad E ability, he also just fits very well into the current meta because you don't really see a whole lot of AD assassins anymore, well at least least nowhere near as much as it used to. Most of the champions you'll be facing nowadays in mid lane are going to be AP champions, so maybe like an Orianna, a Xerath, a Ziggs even, Victor, Vel'Koz, many champions like that. And if you haven't guessed yet, well, Veigar's kit is actually designed to just simply annihilate those champions, especially with his ultimate. So he really just fits very well into the current meta in my opinion. One cool thing about Veigar is that he's pretty much an AP caster version of Nasus, so the longer the game progresses, the stronger and stronger you become thanks to the Q stacking up your AP. I've also realized that almost every game I've played with Veigar where I'm not behind, as long as I get my first 3 items, being for instance a Luden Zeko, a Rabadon's, and an Archangel staff, I almost have 1000 AP with just those items alone and the stacks from my Q. So that right there I think is actually quite ridiculous. He's got really good AoE control in a team fight with his E ability, even though it does have that annoying delay now. However, if you combine that and you land a decent E ability and throw down a W, well, you're just going to be dealing an insane amount of damage AoE, especially if you can land your Q on 2 targets, since it now does go through the first target and it does hit a second target, making even his Q somewhat of an AoE type ability as well. His ultimate will just flat out annihilate someone's face from existence, and I mean, this is the champion that I've personally just been playing more often myself, and I also feel like fits very well into the current meta, being a lot of AP mid laners. The cons of this poor little Yordle is the fact that his Q is now a skill shot, so landing it could definitely be a bit harder than of course a target ability. The delay on his E ability still sucks quite a bit. His laning phase is very so-so. I mean, you're spending most of it just trying to get as much farm as you can with your Q, while probably getting harassed quite often. And his ultimate is actually somewhat easily counterable if you get a Banshee's Veil and or a Zhonya's. But other than that, this AP stacking monstrosity of an AP mid laner is well deserving of the #1 spot. So that about wraps up this video of my new list of top 5 underrated AP mids. Guys, if you did enjoy it or found it informative, entertaining, or whatever, please definitely throw in a like, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't, check out my other videos as well, and I really hope to see you for the next one. Peace.